It's the Free Thought Project Radio. I'm Bob Tuskin. We'll kick things off today by going to Australia and speaking with researcher Max Igan to get his perspective on the police state actions of late. We'll also talk with Dr. Kevin Barrett today. It's his first ever interview on the police state and more. Professor Kevin Barrett will join us a little bit later on today's show. We'll premiere the first ever edition of the Free Thought 5. This is 5 of the most outrageous story we covered at the Free Thought Project this last week. It's guaranteed to outrage you and shock you. And of course we'll talk with researcher Mark Passio to get his views on what he calls mental illness in the police departments of America and abroad. Very excited about this Free Thought Project Radio, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you join us on the journey. We got all the aforementioned topics coming up and so much more. Stay tuned. Here we go. We'll begin this edition of the Free Thought Radio in Australia. Max Igan is a documentary filmmaker and activist. I got a chance to talk with Max briefly about the Ferguson riots and the general feeling of the police state and the issues surrounding it. Here's what Max had to say about the aforementioned topics.
Well, I think the whole Ferguson riots, they're pushing for race riots in the United States. I think a lot of it is staged. A lot of it is they're being openly brutal because they're trying to push people into open revolution because it's the only means they've got of locking the United States down and declaring martial law. That's what I think they're aiming for with all of this.
And do you think they're trying to perpetuate the division with race and everything else in order to be able to follow?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's the classic Hegelian dialectic. Is it not problem, reaction, solution?
Absolutely. They're pushing for race riots. They've been doing it for quite a while, and that's what all of this Ferguson stuff is about. It's an open push for racial discrimination, race riots, leading towards martial law. That's what they're aiming for.
Coming up next, we'll talk to former LAPD police officer Rex Brockie about his views on filming the police and more. But first, we welcome the premiere of the new segment we like to call the Free Thought 5. The following 5 stories contain graphic language and shocking material. It's now time for the Free Thought 5. I'll take a look at 5 stories from the Free Thought Project this past week that are guaranteed to shock you and make you want to get out there and hold somebody accountable. And then number 1 for the Free Thought Project 5, these comments by cops on the Eric Garner decision will turn your stomach. According to police1.com's own terms, to leave a comment on their website, you must be a verified law enforcement professional. So all of the comments from an article published about the outcome of the Eric Garner story on police1.com, at least in theory, came from police officers. And it started with this ignorant comment from a gentleman claiming that the rather large gentleman died of pre-existing coronary conditions. Well, that's not correct, because the New York City Medical Examiner's Office even released a statement ruling that the official cause of death was a homicide due to the compression of neck, chest, and positioning during the restraint by police. Well, the ignorant comments don't stop there, ladies and gentlemen. VON1, screen name VON1, says, okay, ladies and gentlemen, we all agree this is a good day for cops in the use of force incidents. Great English. Very happy for the outcome, for sure. The man should not have resisted. Somehow, I'm hearing the song, Put Another Log in the Fire. These sarcastic and ignorant remarks continue, and they become more and more shocking. This police officer says that, quote, "Isn't it great how the press minimizes what the criminal did and vilifies the evil white NYC police officer, portraying him as killing a harmless, unarmed black man?" Here comes Eric Holder. Well, folks, I got a comment about that comment. First off, this isn't about black or white. All of this fueling of the fire of race tensions is unnecessary in my mind. And second off, this guy is not a criminal. He was selling Lucy cigarettes. Did they have to use so much force for somebody who was doing a non-violent crime? No victim, no crime. That's the bottom line. You can read all the insane comments at thefreethoughtproject.com.
Don't try to brutalize me. Are you a terrorist? Fucking Arabic? Fight? Fight? Oh yeah. That's how Rogers County does it.
What you just heard was a police officer beating a man who was handcuffed. This incident happened back in June of 2011. The officer was Brian Spartan, and I guess he couldn't hold his temper back after harassing remarks from the gentleman who was being arrested. He has on his body cam surveillance footage showing him beating the man and repeatedly elbowing him in the face. Well, he was fired. Yes, that's right, he was fired. Even when the police officers are held accountable, though, it can be eventually negated by the power of their unions and the level of the collective bargaining leverage they possess. That's right, he got his job back and back pay. And if so-called law enforcement isn't busy enough shooting innocent people because of the war on drugs, this story coming in at number 3 is guaranteed to piss you off. The war on the right to exist wages on as cops clear largest homeless camp in the U.S. You know, you've been hearing about these stories of police saying, no, you can't feed the hungry. That's right. You can't feed the hungry in the United States of America, ladies and gentlemen. Well, here's a story of police in San Jose clearing out what was called the jungle, and it's considered to be the largest homeless encampments in the nation. Municipal workers, including police and social service, as well as animal control and construction contractors, moved into the camp on Thursday to help clear out the Creekside camp, where as many as 300 people lived in tents and makeshift shelters. Yolanda Gutierrez says, "It's like a big family out here. We all looked out for each other, especially the females that are single. We all had our own little group that we would check in with one another." It sounds to me like this was an area of family. This was an area of unfortunate people gathering to try to live their lives. I'm sure many of them suffered from mental illness and could not receive help from the state. And this is what they did. They had this encampment. Folks, I got to tell you, seeing the pictures of authorities going in and dismantling this area is absolutely disheartening. You can go to the Free Thought Project to see that article and witness the photos. And number 4 is a very sad story of another gentleman losing his life. No, not at the hands of terrorists, ladies and gentlemen, but at the hands of a supposed peace officer. 34-year-old Romain Brisbane was shot and killed by a police officer because the officer mistakenly thought that he was carrying a gun. Well, it turns out he was not carrying a gun. Here's what his friend and fellow passenger the night of the shooting had to say about the encounter with police.
I didn't hear the police say nothing. I didn't hear the police say freeze. I didn't hear the police say anything of police nature. Like you hear police. I heard it afterwards, but I didn't hear it before.
He goes on to say that they found a little bit of weed in the car. Of course, this once again points to the fact that the war on drugs only creates more problems in our society. Number 5. Arizona cop caught on cam brutally attacking a teen girl in Mesa, Arizona. You're listening to the audio right now. Female officer ran up on a 15-year-old runaway who was mentally unstable and started punching her multiple times in the face. The mother then enters the picture and runs up, and she's pleading with the officers to stop, saying that her daughter is mentally unstable and has asthma. The video, which was filmed by Luis Paul Santiago, went absolutely viral on Facebook with over 55,000 shares.
Pull over.
Of course, they pulled over, and they explicitly told the mother and the young lady that they had the video on their cell phones. Of course, the officers tried to delete it unsuccessfully, and here we have another case of citizens holding the police accountable.
I have it on video. She punched her in the face. I have it on video. I have it on video.
No indictment in the death of Eric Garner. A grand jury in New York City has decided not to charge a white New York City police officer in the death of an unarmed African-American man.
I don't know. I honestly don't know what to say. If comedy is tragedy plus time, I need more time. But I would really settle for less tragedy, to be honest with you. You know, I think what is so utterly depressing is that none of the ambiguities that existed in the Ferguson case exist in the Staten Island case. And yet the outcome is exactly the same. No crime, no trial, all harm, no foul. In Ferguson, at least you had conflicting witness testimony. You had conflicting forensics. You had the specter, at least, of police self-defense. But here, there is none of that. The coroner called it a homicide. The guy's not acting threatening, and we know that not through witness testimony, unreliable bystanders, but because we are watching it. Someone taped it. A couple of days ago, the White House proposed more cameras on cop vests as a solution to this type of violence. I assume that the solution they're proposing, if implemented, would look something like the Eric Garner case.
That, of course, was Jon Stewart from Comedy Central's The Daily Show. He goes on to talk about whether or not saving money on these cameras would be a good thing, because they show clearly with this case, the Eric Garner case, that without a doubt the camera didn't make a difference. And we have police on a regular basis show repeatedly, and we show these videos at the Free Thought Project again and again. There's a couple that were released just this week. The police don't want to be filmed. And you have to ask yourself, why is that? Now, that being said, there are a few good peace officers that don't mind being filmed and don't mind being held accountable. And it's very important that we educate law enforcement about our right to film. And there's many projects out there with people teaching that we have a right to film. We have a right to film buildings. I have a video of me trying to film the Federal Reserve building. They told me I couldn't do it. I asked why. Here's the kicker. You know what they told me? They told me I couldn't film the building because terrorists could pinpoint the location. Now, how absurd is that? You ever hear of Google Earth? Exactly. Anyways, I got a chance to talk with a former LAPD officer. His name's Rex Brocky. He's now a liberty activist and author. Rex Brocky had this to say about cameras and the police.
Back when I was a cop, of course, this was back in the dark ages, and there was no way physically to have such a thing as a lapel cam. But I would have loved it, because since I viewed myself as a genuine public servant, I went into it for the knight in shining armor angle, not, personal enrichment, other than the enrichment of helping my fellow man. And I would have loved a lapel cam, because all of my actions would have always been defensible. if someone, I had several complaints filed on me for utter nonsense, and for one of them I was suspended for 6 months, 3 of them without pay, by the way, over a silly joke. It's ridiculous. And if I'd had a lapel cam, anyone viewing the footage would have seen that it was just a silly joke. Just to reiterate, this was while I was a cop in the service, before my civilian service. And I was signing people out of a high security area, and of course every day at quitting time, all of these, high security civilians all queued up in a long line at the sign out gate, for the guard to, you had to look at their ID and check their signature on the log and then let them out one by one. Well, about 15 or 20 places back in the line, one third woman in her 30s said something, I no longer remember her exact words, but something to the effect of, geez, it'd take less time if I just climbed the fence. And I said, now this is with my head down, still, checking the sign log for the other people, and in front of all these other people, I said, oh, ma'am, you wouldn't want to do that. I'd have to shoot you, and think of all the paperwork that would cause. And that everybody laughed, including her. And for that remark, I was suspended for 6 months. On that utterly unfounded, basically she claimed I threatened to shoot her. Now, would anyone reviewing lapel cam footage of that have gotten the slightest idea that I could have been serious in that threat?
I think not.
That's why a lapel cam is valuable for any honest cop, and all of us should be desperate to make sure that all of our cops are honest. I don't remember the department. I believe it's San Francisco, although I could easily be wrong on that. But there is one West Coast-ish department in the United States I saw a story on recently where their officer complaints have dropped something more than 70-80%.
Wow.
Just by having officers wear lapel cams. It's a solution.
Let me ask you about this lapel cam thing, if I can speak straight here. The Michael Garner case was recorded by witnesses. And this recording clearly showed the police officer choking him to death. And that didn't matter. The camera footage did not make a difference in the overall decision by the grand jury.
But by a grand jury. Okay, I will confess, not been following the case closely. My outrage at the rough outlines of it I knew was sufficient to cloud my judgment. Okay, that does bother me that a grand jury did not find the officer culpable. I can only assume that there were other facts on the video that whoever was defending the cop managed to because I can only assume they had an attorney from the government there at the grand jury proceedings. And he must have argued that using the mystique of deadly force and such that, well, this officer was in fear of his life. See all these other incidents where people have, well, unfortunately, yes. If you're a cop, and I speak from personal experience, you are attempting to force people to do something they really don't want to do. You cannot believe how much some people will fight, but mostly they're fighting to get away. And it's not, on the other hand, I have served where there have been clubs where supposedly you have to win a fight with a cop to join. And while you've got that attitude on the part of certain people, then being a police officer will be a dangerous occupation.
Sure, and I understand that, and we get that at the Free Thought Project. However, this case with Michael Garner was quite startling. He was being apprehended because of selling cigarettes. Again, victimless crime that was not a threat to anyone. And yes, he did not comply with the officer's remarks, or orders, as they put it. Orders. Yeah, right? But overall, he was nonviolent, and they put him in a chokehold that led to his death. The quarter called it a homicide, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So I guess going back to the lapel pins, don't you think that we ought to have more justice with the video footage from this incident, and that because of this incident, it shows that the system is corrupt beyond just not having accountability with cameras?
Oh, the system is so far over the edge and so far down the tubes. Back when I was a police officer, there was, I should mention, by the way, this was in Los Angeles, California, held up at the time, and I think justifiably so, as one of the finest, if not the finest, department in the country and perhaps in the Western world. The evidence for this, by the way, was that we lost many officers every year. They would go through the LAPD Academy, serve 1 year and a day to get what they called at that time their post certificate, which was Peace Officer Standard of Training. And with that certificate, just as a patrolman and 1 year experience, they could go be chief of police in Chicago. Is a slight exaggeration, but not much. I know that there were standing recruiting offers from many other departments, Detroit and New York among them, to become an instant captain in any of those departments, a post which normally would take 15 to 20 years of experience to reach. 1 year of experience on the LAPD would get it for you like that. And that is not an exaggeration at all. In that department at the time, we were all terrified of internal affairs. We were all worked to walk the straight and narrow. At least everybody gave lip service to that, and I know personally that quite a few actually did, such as myself and some very fine officers that I worked with. We tried our best, and the scrutiny that they gave to us was immense. I remember at one time there were a couple of officers that did get caught in a corruption scandal. They had been basically stealing drug money, and they had bought houses in other states in other names, and they still got caught, even though there was no direct paper trail at all. And, you know, I was proud to serve in a department that did things like that. However, all of this is more than 30 years in the past, more like 35. And the way that it has gotten since is just unconscionable. The stories cross my desk every single day that make me too ill to read them over the air, of cops that get away with not just murder, but theft and ruining of lives, and I mean, just not to even open the huge can of worms called civil asset forfeiture. But there's a piece circulating right now about a U.S. attorney gleefully explaining that the cops can steal a $300,000 house from someone if $10 worth of marijuana is found or placed on the property, even in a state where marijuana is legal, as long as the cops are working with a federal agency which still considers marijuana illegal.
Rex Brocky brought up several compelling points, but I want to touch on the federal forfeiture regulations, and it's not just federal. On a local level, forfeiture is taking place. In Philadelphia, a homeowner had to deal with this very issue. His son was found with a little bit of heroin. Yes, the war on drugs, ladies and gentlemen, once again, is the justification for ruining people's lives and families. And that's certainly the case in this story that was on the Free Thought Project.
I built this house with my own hands. I'm a working guy. I work every day, 6 days a week, 7 days if I have to.
For 8 years, Christos Sorvelis, who built his own painting business,
I built the oven for pizza and barbecue,
has also been toiling away on his family's dream house in the suburbs of Philadelphia.
I was so upset thinking somebody's going to come over and take my house for nothing. That makes me crazy.
Without warning, Sorvelis says Philadelphia police and prosecutors seized his house.
I was going nuts. So what do you mean?
He and his wife, Markella, have never been charged with a crime or even accused of any wrongdoing.
It was horrible. Horrible.
And the nightmare began in March when police showed up at the house.
By the time I got to the door, they had already opened the door with his hand in and had a gun to my dog's head.
Police arrested their 22-year-old son Yanni on drug charges, $40 worth of heroin, and claim he was selling drugs out of the home.
I didn't know what he was doing. I'm not with him 24 hours a day.
A month and a half later,
they said that we're going to seize your house.
They came back.
They had a sledgehammer. We're going to break down your walls. We're going to break your pipes. This house is going to be ours. And as he was explaining to me what was going on, there was people closing the doors with screws, locking them. They had the electric company here to turn off my electric, my gas.
Police and prosecutors came armed with a lawsuit against the house itself. It was being forfeited and transferred to the custody of the Philadelphia district attorney, all because of their son's first offense drug charges. Yanni pleaded no contest.
It was scary. It was frustrating.
I said, listen, this house belongs to me. Nothing to do with my son.
But that didn't matter. Police and prosecutors kicked them and their children out that day.
And where I'm going to go? What I'm going to do with my two daughters, my wife, the dog, me, where are we going?
The Sorabellas family is not alone. In 2 years, nearly 500 families in Philadelphia had their homes or cars taken away by city officials, according to Pennsylvania's Attorney General. They use a civil forfeiture law that allows them to seize people's property, saying they have probable cause that it's somehow connected to illegal drugs.
The general core of the civil forfeiture law is to capture the cash or ill-gotten gains or contraband that criminals have used to commit a particular crime.
But unlike criminal forfeiture, the civil law allows authorities to seize property without the owner ever being convicted or even charged.
Civil forfeiture is something that is an assault upon fundamental notions of private property ownership and due process.
The city of brotherly love is far and away the most aggressive in the state when it comes to seizing people's property. Over a 4-year period, the second largest county in Pennsylvania filed about 200 petitions for civil forfeiture. Philadelphia filed nearly 7,000 petitions in 1 year alone, according to a class action lawsuit just recently filed by citizens there.
Philadelphia has really just turned forfeiture into a machine that devours people's property and takes their rights at the same time.
Philadelphia officials over a 10-year period have seized more than 1,000 houses, about 3,300 vehicles, and $44 million in cash in civil forfeitures, according to the lawsuit. And a large chunk of that money goes straight to salaries for the Philly DA's office and the police.
Isn't that a conflict of interest, ladies and gentlemen? It most certainly is. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a police state that has gotten out of control. Absolutely ridiculous that this is happening to good people that work hard. The war on drugs, of course, is the major reason why a lot of this is happening. But it doesn't stop there. It has to do with taxation. It has to do with eminent domain and other government bureaucracy that uses the people with shiny badges and funny-looking costumes to enforce their government bureaucracy. That's the bottom line. Coming up in just a moment, we'll talk with Mark Passio, a researcher who has looked at the mental psychopathy that many of our so-called peace officers have. But first, we will be joined by Dr. Kevin Barrett for a look at his views on the police state.
Police state has gotten worse over my lifetime. I first was aware of the pattern of police abuse in big cities when I was growing up outside of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. In Milwaukee, there were some rogue cops, and the department had a culture beating the crap out of people, hippies, black people, and hurting people and getting away with it. And there were some really famous incidents in Milwaukee, actually, as I was growing up. George Carlin was dragged off the stage for saying the words you can't say on TV and beaten up by the cops. And then when I was in college, Wendy O. Williams, a punk singer with the Plasmatics, was beaten up and abused by cops in Milwaukee after I think she started a chainsaw on stage and started chainsawing up American icons or something like that. And so this sort of thing was going on as I was growing up, and I was, vaguely aware of it. In Madison, Wisconsin, where I went to college, the police chief, David Cooper, had taken over during the 60s protests, and he chilled out that department. The cops in Madison had been beating the crap out of protesters, staging police riots on a regular basis and pissing off these hippie peaceniks to the point that the peaceniks were thinking about dropping bricks on cops' heads from high places and things like that. They were so angry. It was turning into a war zone, and then Cooper took over. And he taught the cops, I think he taught them some martial art philosophies, meditation, something like that. And they chilled right out, and from then on, the cops in Madison were very, very easy to deal with, especially compared to other cities. And as I was a young adult in San Francisco, I actually got badly abused by cops at one point, and so I became very sympathetic to the other people I was hearing about having the same kinds of experiences or worse. The African-American folks, of course, had it a lot worse in general. And so I have a long history of paying attention to this and being outraged at the way that the reality of the American police state doesn't line up with our constitutional ideals by any means. I think the reason it's getting worse now is that we're in a new paradigm in which they're ruling entirely by fear, no longer by hopes and dreams and progress. You know, they used to rule by telling us that each generation was going to get richer and your kids will be better off than you are and everything's getting better all the time. And this great philosophy of progress, that's dead. Now it's just rule by fear. The Power of Nightmares BBC documentary does a really good job in discussing this. And 9/11 was kind of the big move towards, you know, a new paradigm in which we'd be ruling by fear. The society has been fully fear-based since 9/11. And I think people are kind of getting sick of it, getting sick of seeing the jobs all gone, all the good manufacturing jobs, working class jobs have gone to other countries, and we've got these ghettos, like some of the places. Ferguson probably has some neighborhoods like that, and other cities have neighborhoods full of people who are kind of, you know, surplus people at this point because we're just not manufacturing anything here. And the drug culture moves in there. The CIA brings drugs into these neighborhoods, and the people realize that the authorities are their enemy. And so it's kind of a war zone, and, you know, maybe we need a little bit of an American intifada, but at the same time, with a heavily armed population and a crazy police culture, that could get really ugly. So I don't know. My advice would be for everybody to chill out. I had Rufina Ancalasaria, a meditation teacher, on my radio show recently. She's taught criminals in prison to meditate, and she's had great results. They have a very low recidivism rate if they meditate. And so we discussed that, you know, her starting a program to teach cops to meditate. I think we need to get cops off of coffee and donuts and get them on to meditation and deep relaxation, because their bad behavior is coming out of fear and anxiety and all of these bad emotions. Yeah.
I totally agree. And you know what's a big part of that is the adrenaline that they become addicted to. And that adrenaline is like any other drug, Kevin. It really can create a adverse reaction in the brain. And after a while, they become addicted to the adrenaline, and it creates literal holes. The scientists have done research on what adrenaline can do to the body and to the brain in particular. And a lot of our police officers are addicted to this sort of confrontation, addicted to this adrenaline, and we see that. And that's also in conjunction, as you said, with their diet and so on and so forth. So I totally agree. I'd love to, for this podcast, interview her about meditation and that as a way of dealing with some of the problems we have. Kevin, I want to ask you real quick about agent provocateurs. You know, we talk about false flags, we talk about these sorts of actions, and it seems clear to me that whenever you have a high-profile protest, whether it's in Ferguson or elsewhere, there's always agent provocateur somewhere lurking in the background to try to stir things up. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, that's right. That's an ancient strategy for keeping order, is, you know, creating your enemy and then scaring everybody and turning them against that enemy. And rulers have been doing this forever. And the cops do it by planting agents provocateur in the ranks of protesters. And they make the protest look bad for the media, and they give the cops the excuse to come in and smash the protest. And they did some of that with the Occupy movement. There was a concerted plan to shut down Occupy came out of the FBI, went to all the local police departments, and they just all in sync used these kinds of strategies to destroy Occupy. And who knows what they'll do. The problem with this situation now, though, from their perspective, is that it's the actual police practices themselves that are the focus of the protests. So it might make it a little harder for them to get away with some of these tricks because the spotlight is on the police practices themselves. But I wouldn't be surprised that if there aren't police provocateurs, these are mostly peaceful demonstrations. And when it starts getting ugly and windows are broken and things like that, or somebody, throws something at the cops or a shot rings out, who knows whether that might not be a provocateur.
Articulate, passionate, well-researched, and completely on the money. Mark Passio, author, researcher, radio show host, and presenter at the Free Your Mind conference, joins me now for a discussion about the police. Mark has done a lot of research on the police and their actions in our society today, and he talked about it at his first lecture at the Free Your Mind conference. Well, he's coming back with more information, and it's guaranteed to shock you. Mark, welcome to the Free Thought Project.
Bob, thanks for having me on.
Tell us a little bit about your views of this police state.
Well, it's amazing to me that the people of the United States have basically refused the wisdom of the founders of this country and were not on guard against the rise of a standing army in their midst, which is what the police forces of the United States constitute effectively. You have a militarized regime with the weapons of modern military troops living amongst the people, living amongst the population of American society. The founders of this country continually warned us against this dynamic, continuously warned us to not allow that dynamic to take place, or we would already find ourselves in a situation of slavery. And the people of this country don't realize that they're already at war. There are casualties already being taken on the side of the people of America, and we are already effectively having a war waged against us on our own soil. Yet so few people can see that and recognize that as such as being true, because their head is still full of these mind control notions that somehow the police are brave men and women who are in the service of the people and are here to protect us and serve us and look out for our better interests, when in fact really nothing could be further from the truth. These people are often quite psychopathic in their behaviors. I've talked from day one about the brain physiology of people who get addicted to adrenaline, adrenal rushes, adrenaline-driven situations, and how that changes the fundamental neurophysiology of the human brain. And I've talked about police from day one in my research as people who actively have physical brain damage done to the neocortex of their brain through the kind of consciousness that they are in chronically. And, I don't know if people are taking, the work that I've put out there on the human brain seriously, on the brains of police seriously, if they think that it's metaphorical or it's symbolic. And I assure you in no way is the work that I have put out there on the brains and the brain health of police in any way symbolic or metaphorical. It is quite literal, where I try to explain how chronic left brain imbalance and chronic adrenaline-driven consciousness, being in adrenaline-driven situations, will actually severely damage the ability of someone to think logically and in a reasoned way. And it will put them in a continual fight or flight mechanism, which actually hampers their ability to make accurate assessments of situations and hampers their ability to act in any kind of a way that resembles, balance and righteousness. They're acting in completely imbalanced ways. They're acting in completely psychotic and psychopathic ways. And people keep giving them passes on this behavior for whatever reason, because they're told this story that somehow they're on the side of the people and, they're dealing with the real extreme bad guys every day. And yet what we're seeing actively play out in our world is situations where police are murdering someone who has done something so bold as to sell some Lucy cigarettes. God forbid. The absolute depths of demonic evil here we're dealing with, where Big Daddy didn't get his cut of taxation. Wow. God forbid.
Yeah.
We need to actually murder people like that. And that's what we're seeing play out. This is how psychopathic these order followers have become, because they don't want to take responsibility for their own behavior, and they think they're effectively, what they've come to believe is that they're God, and that they can do whatever immoral and completely psychopathic actions that they wish to take with impunity. And the only question I have to ask is, how long will the American public tolerate this nonsense?
The last segment on today's show will be about Police Chief Mark Kessler. I was shocked, well, not shocked, to hear what he had to say on a recent Alan Combs interview via Fox News. By chance, do you remember Police Chief Mark Kessler? Okay, well, if you don't remember him, here's who he is. He made a couple of viral YouTube videos claiming this.
Secretary of State John Kerry, that piece of shit traitor. Who is he to decide what we can and can't own? You know what I have to say? Come and take it, motherfuckers!
In other videos he released on his YouTube channel, he had similar remarks and constantly showed himself as a militia leader and true police officer fighting for the patriots, the real patriots. Now, don't get me wrong, folks. I think a lot of what he had to say was very much based on sound information and sound philosophy. Yes, we should have a right to bear arms. Yes, I am all for that. But it turns out that his hyperbolic presentation was done on purpose. Yeah, that's right. In a recent interview with Fox News host Alan Combs, Kessler said that, quote, he was a police informant put out there to attract patriot groups and other lone wolves for federal authorities. Now, he would not name what those federal authorities were, or who they were, rather, but he did indeed say that he supposedly, and I say supposedly because I don't believe much of what he had to say, and I'll get to that in a little bit, but supposedly he had taken down several militia groups. The XXX Minutemen was one of them that he mentioned, and other lone wolves, again, in the state of Texas. Wannabe terrorists, he called them. He said that all of what he had to say was acting, and that he was not someone who genuinely believed the ideas that he espoused. Well, I tried to call him, and I got his voicemail.
You have reached 3% VOG with Chief Kessler. We are unavailable at this time to take your call. Please leave your name, number, and detailed message, and someone will get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you.
Mark, hi, this is Bob Tuskin. I had you on the show a while back, and I wanted to interview you for the Free Thought Project and get to learn a little bit more about what kind of an informant you were, what other goals you accomplished, and what you did with the database of people that you contacted, that you worked with, that you reached out to, and so on and so forth. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. This sort of action is not what we need. We need police officers, peace officers, and citizens actually protecting one another and not trying to entrap honest people that want to stand up for their rights. Well, this concludes the inaugural edition of the Free Thought Radio with Bob Tuskin. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I enjoyed making it. It's not easy to talk about a lot of the things we deal with, but somebody has to hold the powers that shouldn't be accountable. Please subscribe and feel free to touch base with us if you want to share any intel.